Welcome to the Beat Reporter's Inbox on MLB.com, presented by Edward Jones. I'm Anthony DiComo, MLB.com Mets reporter, with Danny asking the questions. Danny, who's up first?
All right, so we're going to go with Regal, and he asks, will David Wright ever come back? I miss him. Also, do you think he'll ever become the Mets manager or have a front office position?
That's such a sad way to phrase it. I miss him. Yeah, if you're asking me if I think David Wright will play another game for the Mets, yes, I do think he will. I do think he will reach the point physically where he can get back on the field and maybe even play a number of games over the next few years. He is under contract through 2020. If the question is, will he ever impact the Mets again in a significant way, that's a lot harder for me to believe. It's a lot harder for me to swallow. And if anyone can do it, it's probably David Wright, just knowing his work ethic, knowing how much he wants to come back, knowing how much he wants to be a part of this team, and knowing, frankly, from what a high place he came from. He was one of the best players in baseball for a long time. So it's hard for me to swallow, though, the fact that he's just physically going to be able to do it between the neck issues he's had, the shoulder now, the back issue that's going to haunt him for the rest of his career, for the rest of his life. No, I don't think he'll ever probably be an impactful player again. Once he retires, after that happens, could he be a coach, a front office person? I'm not sure, honestly, that he is the type of guy who wants to be around the day-to-day, everyday grind of Major League Baseball. He's got a growing family now, a wife, and a beautiful young child. I think that's where his focus will probably lie. I do think he'll be a part of the organization in some respect. Maybe he comes to spring training. Maybe he serves as an instructor. Maybe he just shows up every once in a while and shows his face and remains part of the culture here, because it is very much a culture that he's a huge part of. He's the face of the franchise. He has been for years and will always be one of the most beloved Mets. So I don't think he's going to go away forever, but as far as being a manager, a coach, someone who's here in uniform on a day-to-day, I don't really see that from David Wright.
Okay, thanks for that question, Regal. We have Eric. So this is looking into the future. He asks, will the Mets do as the Yanks did in 16 and play Rosario, Smith, and maybe Cicchini, Nimmo in the second half of 17 to prep for a revamp in 18?
Well, you know, if they fall out of the playoff race, certainly. Yeah, you will see Ahmed Rosario. You will see Dominic Smith. You'll probably see Gavin Cicchini. You'll see all these key pieces come up, and that would, frankly, probably come after a trade deadline in which the Mets get rid of a Jay Bruce or a Neil Walker or even a Lucas Duda and guys who are on these expiring contracts. But I don't really see that happening. I do think the Mets are going to hang around and stick around long enough that when they get to the trade deadline, they're going to be buyers, not sellers. I don't think they're just going to give up. I don't think they're going to get to the point where they're far enough out of the division, or certainly far enough out of the wild card, where they're just going to say, we can't do this. Because remember, the Mets were 2 games under 500 last August, mid-August, and they wound up making the wild card game. And I think with a very similar roster this year, the Mets see this and say, well, if we can make that sort of run again, it doesn't take that much. There's a lot of other flawed teams in the National League out there. Then once we get to the wild card game, we'll have a healthy Noah Syndergaard. We'll have potentially Jacob deGrom pitching at the top of his game. We'll have maybe Matt Harvey, who looks a lot better than the Matt Harvey we see right now. And you can win a wild card game. You can win a playoff series with that. You can make a surprise run with that, like the Mets did 2 years ago. So if we see Ahmed Rosario this year, and I do think we will, I think it's going to be more in a role to help the team win. Same with Dominic Smith. I think it's not just going to be we're going to play these guys every day because we're out of contention and we're looking forward to getting their development for 2018. No. I think it's going to be, we want to make the playoffs. How can these guys help us?
Awesome. Thanks for that question, Eric. We have Chloe, who asks, what's the move with Grandy when Cespedes gets back, since Terry is not going to move Michael Conforto?
Yeah, this is going to be one of the most difficult things Terry Collins is going to have to do this year, because he sees the same thing we see, and while the Mets aren't admitting it publicly right now, they all see the same thing we see. You look at Jay Bruce and Yoenis Cespedes and Michael Conforto, those 3 guys have to play, and they've all been significantly more productive than Curtis Granderson, and Curtis Granderson is going to be the guy who goes to the bench. That's just reality right now, and you're talking about a 14-year big league veteran, a guy who's well respected throughout the game, Roberto Clemente Award winner last year, big influence in the clubhouse. The Mets love Curtis Granderson, and it's very difficult to call a guy like that in your office and say, look, you're going to be coming off the bench, you're going to be pinch hitting, you're not going to be playing a whole lot. Curtis Granderson is a professional, and I imagine he will take it as well as anyone could, but certainly he's not going to be happy about it. No one will be happy about it in his shoes. But yeah, numbers-wise, that's what you have to do, and that's what the Mets will ultimately do. But the one thing I'll say is, just like when we talked about Michael Conforto's playing time at the beginning of the year, and I said at the time, these things work themselves out. People get hurt, injuries happen. He'll be playing every day before you know it, and lo and behold, he is. Same thing's going to happen. The Mets are going to need Curtis Granderson at some point this season, even if he does go to the bench, just like they're going to need Conforto and Bruce and Cespedes. These things do tend to work themselves out, and I think in this situation it will.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Chloe. Now we have Kathy, who asks, what moves should the Mets make to bolster the bullpen?
Honestly, the best move the Mets could make to bolster the bullpen would be to have their starting pitchers go deeper into the game. And that sounds like a cop-out, but Hansel Robles is not as bad as he's shown recently. Addison Reed is a better pitcher than he's shown recently. Go up and down the line. These guys, Fernando Salas is another great example, are just working too much, and there's not much the Mets have been able to do about it. They've tried to finagle the situation a little bit, putting Robert Gesellman down there in the bullpen to eat some innings. They brought on Neil Ramirez, they signed, to eat some innings. But these problems are going to keep cropping up as long as Jacob deGrom is going 6 innings every time out. Zach Wheeler is going 6 innings every time out. Matt Harvey is going 6 innings or less every time out. So when you're relying on your bullpen for 3, 4, sometimes, as in yesterday, 7+ innings every day, you're going to wear out the best relievers in the game if you have them down there. And obviously not having Jurius Familia hurts, and assuming the Mets are still in contention toward the end of July, certainly you're going to see the Mets make the types of moves that they've made in years past, getting an Addison Reed at the trade deadline, getting a Tyler Clippard as they did 2 years ago at the trade deadline. They can make those moves. Guys like that are always available, but the core issue, the one that they have to solve now, is getting the starting pitchers going deeper into games, because once that happens, everything else falls into place.
Awesome. Thanks, Kathy, for that. Next, we have Brian, who asks, what's the move when dArnaud comes back?
Well, he's going to play. Travis dArnaud is going to play, and it could be as soon as this week. It should be as soon as this series against the Padres. He's been doing really well at Las Vegas in his rehab, and the Mets will welcome him back. And I know everyone looks at Rene Rivera and says, well, he had that 11-game hitting streak. He's a better defender than Travis dArnaud. All of that is true, and he will play. The Mets have been impressed with his offense. Scouts think it's probably a bit of a mirage, but certainly he is a better defender than Travis dArnaud. He has shown that, and he will continue to play, despite the fact that Noah Syndergaard, whom he was his personal catcher for the first month of the season and for most of the end of last season, is on a disabled list and won't be pitching. Rene Rivera is valued. He will play, but Travis dArnaud is the starter, and as long as he hits even a little bit, he's a better offensive player than Rene Rivera. He has the potential to be a significantly better offensive player than Rene Rivera. And the Mets can stomach his injury troubles. They can stomach his defensive woes if he hits. Because if he hits like the Mets know he can, Travis dArnaud just adds another element to the lineup.
Great. Thanks, Brian, for that. Now we have John, who asks, will Conforto be the next face of the Mets, or will Noah Syndergaard?
Well, it's tough to top Noah Syndergaard right now. Certainly him not being healthy and not being here for much of this season is going to hurt that. Excuse me. But Michael Conforto has positioned himself now where even if he's not the quote-unquote face of the franchise, because that's such a subjective label anyway, he has a chance to be really at the center, the very center of this core of what the Mets are trying to do going forward. And this is going to be a different-looking team starting next year. You have a lot of free agents between Lucas Duda and Neil Walker, and Asdrubal Cabrera can be a free agent. And you go on down the line, there's about 6 or 7 guys who you have the potential to lose. And this is going to be a new Mets team building up with the core of Syndergaard and building up with Michael Conforto and building up with Ahmed Rosario and Dom Smith when they come in. And Conforto is as much a part of that as anyone else. I think he's shown this year, maybe even that he can be better than we thought he might be when he was drafted. I think everyone always had very high hopes for Michael Conforto. I think people thought he was a potential 300 hitter with a lot of patience who could give you 20 home runs a year. He's looked better than that. And we'll see how he progresses over the course of his season, because he had a hot start to last year too. But he's been one of the best players in baseball over the first 2 months of the season. And when you get this type of guy who has charisma, who knows how to deal with the media, yeah, he could certainly be. I don't know if he's going to top Noah Syndergaard. I don't know if he's going to top Yoenis Cespedes for star power, because let's not forget Cespedes is going to be around for a few years longer as well. But Michael Conforto will be right in the thick of it.
Thanks for that question, John. So going back to Dom Smith, Sam asks, when do you see the Mets calling up Dom Smith or Ahmed Rosario?
Yeah, I think Rosario's the first one to come, and that could happen reasonably soon after the Super 2 cutoff. And what I mean by that, the Super 2 cutoff, is there's a date, probably in early June. It's not a hard and fast rule, but it's a point in the season where a player who comes up, a rookie who comes up, will no longer be Super 2 eligible going forward. And that means that the Mets could potentially save millions and millions of dollars down the year in arbitration money. It's worth it for them to wait. But you look at the left side of the infield right now, while they have depth, Jose Reyes has dealt with some minor injuries. Asdrubal Cabrera is obviously on the disabled list and hasn't played great when he's been healthy. So if the Mets decide at some point in June or even a little later in the summer, in July, that Ahmed Rosario is their best option at shortstop, I don't think they would hesitate to call him up at that point. I think it's all about winning for the Mets, and if they feel like Ahmed Rosario is ready, if they feel like he's their best option at shortstop, he'll be here. Dom Smith is a little bit of a tougher situation because the Mets have high hopes that Lucas Duda can sort of come back from this early season slump and be a better player than he's shown. But it's the same thing goes. If the Mets believe Dominic Smith is their best first baseman, they're not going to shy away from calling him up. They're not going to hesitate in calling him up, at least after that Super 2 deadline passes. So I do think you'll see both players this year. I think Rosario is probably a little more pressing need on the left side of the diamond. But before the end of the year, I think both players will debut.
Awesome. And from Thomas, he asks, do you think the Mets can trade Granderson for a reliever?
No, I really don't. You look at Curtis Granderson right now. He's 36 years old. He's had a rough go of it. I believe he's still the lowest batting average qualifier in Major League Baseball. And, you look at that body of work, and while he's been a very valuable, very productive player, teams are going to look at that and say, well, he's 36. He's probably just at that age where you're no longer a consistent contributor right now. And that's kind of the challenge of the thing, is when things go bad for a Curtis Granderson or a Lucas Duda or whoever it might be, that's when everyone always wants to trade those guys, right? When their value is at their lowest. No, if you're the Mets, maybe you regret not trading Granderson over the winter when you could have gotten a reliever or an impactful piece for him. But right now you're kind of, for lack of a better word, stuck with him. And you hope that going forward, he can be a valuable bat for you off the bench. He has shown signs of life over the past 10 days with the bat. He's hit a couple home runs. He's had a couple of big doubles. He's looked more like the Curtis Granderson we've seen of old. That can be valuable to a contending team if the Mets are contending down the stretch. And again, injuries happen. You cannot count on Yoenis Cespedes, who has a very long history now of leg injuries, of hamstring injuries, of things going wrong, to be healthy over the final 4 months of the season. You need insurance in case he's not. You need insurance in case someone else gets hurt. Curtis Granderson is a valuable guy to have on the roster, to have on the bench, to have wherever you have him in that case. So I do think the Mets will add a reliever, but I don't think it's going to be by trading a Curtis Granderson. I think it'll be by trading a prospect, something along those lines.
Thanks for that question, Thomas. And our last question for you, Anthony, comes from George, who asks, when will Steven Matz come back?
Could be soon. Could be very soon. And that's rare good news for Mets fans. Steven Matz is pitching in a rehab game tomorrow. That's in Las Vegas at AAA. And while the Mets would like him to have one more rehab start after that, which would put him around the first weekend of June where he could come back, it's realistic to expect if Matz has a good outing tomorrow, he could come back shortly after that. The Mets certainly need a rotation help with Tommy Milone struggling. They're going to put Robert Gesellman back into the rotation this week, but they need all the help they can get, and Steven Matz is that. So as long as he proves he's healthy, as long as he proves he's effective, it's going to be real soon for Steven Matz. The key, as it always is for Steven Matz, is staying healthy. So thanks for watching the Beat Reporter's Inbox on MLB.com, presented by Edward Jones, and tune in again next time.